For decades, the entire Canadian music industry revolved around this particular address in downtown Toronto. Long before algorithms decided what people listened to, the corner of Yonge and Gould Streets was a neon-drenched battleground widely known as Canada's Music Row. It was a loud, fiercely competitive strip where massive retail heavyweights fought tooth and nail for every passing customer. Standing high above all that noise at 347 Yonge Street was the undisputed king of the ecosystem, Sam the Record Man. But walk down that exact same stretch of pavement today, you'll find it completely smoothed over by gleaming glass student centers and coffee shops. The modern metropolis has paved right over a retail empire that once dictated the musical tastes of a nation, leaving behind a massive void in the cultural landscape and a lingering mystery about how a business this dominant could simply evaporate. To understand how they lost it all, you first have to understand exactly what they built. In that era, getting your hands on a new album was a highly anticipated weekend event. People would travel downtown, walking under those massive spinning neon records that illuminated the entire block, just to spend hours physically flipping through bins of deep catalog inventory. Shoppers eagerly rubbed shoulders with thousands of others hunting for a specific sound, turning the tactile thrill of discovery into a massive shared experience, a feeling completely divorced from the cold, frictionless digital transactions we have today. When people talk about this spectacular collapse today, it's tempting to point fingers at internal family drama or the arrival of aggressive foreign competitors looking to steal the crown. But the true reality of why this Canadian titan failed is far more complex and much more fascinating. The empire was quietly being hollowed out from the inside, trapped in a cold equation of hidden vulnerabilities and an unprecedented shift in how human beings consume entertainment. They'd built an impenetrable fortress designed perfectly for a special era of retail, completely unaware that the foundational rules of their entire industry were about to be rewritten overnight. Let's go back to the beginning. It's 1936 and a 16-year-old Sam Sniderman is trying to convince his brother Sydney to let him carve out a small section of Sniderman radio sales and service just to sell music records. But what Sam or Sydney never expected was that this tiny area would be the foundation in which a massive empire would be built. That tiny record counter quickly exploded, completely swallowing the family's main radio business. By 1959, the brothers realized their modest College Street roots could no longer contain the demand, and to get onto the main battlefield, they packed up the operation and moved into a leased storefront on Yonge Street, picking a direct fight with the established heavyweights at A&A Records. After just 2 years, they doubled down, and on Labor Day in 1961, they dropped $140,000 to purchase the massive building down the street at 347 Yonge Street, officially planting the flag for their permanent headquarters. Sniderman approached selling music differently than anyone else in the game. Back in the mid-20th century, the Canadian music scene was practically non-existent. Radio airwaves and store shelves were completely choked by American and British imports, making it nearly impossible for domestic artists to actually find an audience in their own backyard. Sniderman saw this massive imbalance and decided to weaponize his growing retail leverage to force a systemic change across the entire industry. When asked about the viability of domestic talent, Sniderman laid out his unvarnished retail philosophy.
Well, that's pretty hard to determine. Our volume is large. We too have to make a profit out of what we're doing. And we wouldn't expose these and sell them if we weren't making a profit out of them.
But he admitted that patriotism wasn't driving sales, saying this.
Well, there's very few of the public that come in and say, hey, I want a Canadian artist. They want an artist that's going to please them. They want music that's going to please them.
To bridge that massive gap between what the public wanted and what the domestic artists needed, Sniderman constantly played local records over the store speakers and actively pushed radio stations to give them airtime.
Well, possibly. You see, up to now, we have been involved in just about every concert that has occurred in our own area here. And we've been involved in many cases of placing a Canadian artist on record. This is without any repayment to ourselves. This, as I say, is my alibi for making the money I make out of the record business here. But I'm born in Canada, and I'm very much partial to a Canadian artist.
He viewed this unpaid advocacy as a personal duty to balance out his massive corporate success. Multinational labels were notoriously hesitant to take on the massive financial risk of pressing physical vinyl for unproven local acts. Snyderman eliminated that bottleneck completely by personally guaranteeing the record companies that his stores would buy at least 1,000 copies of any domestic album they produced. By providing this massive financial safety net, Snyderman essentially underwrote the risk for the entire industry, giving legendary artists like Gordon Lightfoot, Johnny Mitchell, The Guess Who, and Anne Murray the crucial floor space they needed to finally break out. Snyderman knew exactly how to build a highly profitable enterprise, and he deliberately operated his empire like a vital public utility. That relentless dedication earned him the Order of Canada in 1976, permanently cementing his legacy as the true architect of the domestic music industry. That legacy needed a physical home though, and the flagship store at 347 Yonge Street quickly evolved into the living embodiment of Snyderman's philosophy. The building was a labyrinth of mismatched rooms, crooked floors, and badly worn linoleum, packed with an overwhelming volume of inventory. The walls were plastered with promotional materials and autographed photos, perfectly matching the gritty, electric energy of the downtown strip. Buying music here demanded a serious time commitment, and when a purchase was finally made, the albums were ceremoniously heat-sealed into iconic white plastic bags emblazoned with the store's signature greeting. The sheer volume of records was impressive, but the driving force behind the store's dominance was the people on the sales floor. Operating from 8 in the morning until midnight, 6 days a week, the building was staffed by highly passionate music aficionados. Snyderman effectively built an encyclopedic workforce that cultivated fierce customer loyalty. The jazz department was managed by John Norris, the founder of Coda magazine, who spent hours playing obscure imports for avid listeners and introducing generations of shoppers to completely new sounds. This level of service naturally attracted high-profile patrons, including the brilliant classical pianist Glenn Gould, who routinely called the store every Christmas Eve to secure his last-minute holiday gifts. Beyond the daily grind of retail, the building operated as a wildly vibrant cultural hub. Thousands of fans would willingly freeze on the sidewalk for blocks just to score discounted cassettes during legendary sales events, and the cramped indoor aisles frequently transformed into a sweaty live music venue for massive artists ranging from Meatloaf to Radiohead. That electric energy eventually bled out onto the street, turning those towering neon signs into a permanent fixture of popular media. The glowing storefront became so deeply embedded in the city's visual identity that it regularly anchored television broadcasts like Much Music, and Hollywood even used it as the neon-drenched backdrop for the climactic street battle in the 2008 blockbuster, The Incredible Hulk. The history of the massive neon signage is also quite interesting. In 1969, facing a rapidly growing customer base, Snyderman hired local sign makers Sam and Jack Markle to construct a monumental neon installation. This first sign was roughly 7.5 meters wide and 8 meters tall, utilizing complex mechanical flashing units and rows of white neon tubes to create the brilliant illusion of a spinning record. To fund this massive project, Snyderman convinced various record companies to purchase advertising space directly in the center of the spinning disc. As the store expanded further, Claude Neon Inc. was commissioned in 1987 to build a second, identical sign just to the north of the original. They installed massive letters spelling out the founder's name, requiring 550 light bulbs just to illuminate the primary text, proudly declaring the entire space as pure entertainment. Underneath those glowing lights, the building was undergoing a constant, chaotic series of renovations just to keep up with the overwhelming demand. Instead of moving the operation to a bigger warehouse, Snyderman simply swallowed the surrounding real estate piece by piece. In the 1960s, the third floor was bolted onto the back of the main store to serve as a ticket sales and bargain area, and he then bought a nearby property to launch a dedicated tape department, which bizarrely operated directly underneath a fully functioning Chinese restaurant. Then, in the 1970s, he acquired a parking lot behind a bank to build an annex strictly for classical music. By the 1980s, he bought the building next door at 349 Yonge Street, knocking through the walls to connect it to the main store to house a sprawling compact disc section and a video rental floor. In 1991, he finally bought the bank property itself, moving the pop and rock departments to the ground floor and installing massive video screens on the roof. They even pushed into computer software by the mid-1990s with a new department cleverly named Sam the Interactive Man. But conquering a single city block was never the end goal. To scale this highly successful flagship model across the entire country, Snyderman and his sons, Jason and Robert, established a wholly owned subsidiary called Roblin Distributors Ltd. in 1969. This company operated as the central nervous system for a massive national franchise network. At its absolute peak in the 1980s and 90s, the chain boasted 140 locations coast to coast. The entire business model relied on a massive central warehouse located on Church Street, which supplied both the 30 corporate-owned flagships and the vast network of independent franchise owners. This sprawling infrastructure made the company the undisputed king of domestic music retail, allowing them to control a massive percentage of physical media distribution and even publish their own free national music magazine called Network. They'd built an absolute fortress of physical retail, grounded in heavy analog supply chains and prime real estate. It was an incredibly lucrative, unstoppable system, provided the consumer market never changed. But markets always change, and usually the first major crack in a retail fortress comes from a bigger, better funded competitor setting up shop right next door. For decades, the only real threat to Sam Snyderman's empire was A&A Records, located just 2 doors down at 351 Yonge Street. The two businesses engaged in a fierce, highly localized rivalry, constantly undercutting each other on price while sharing the exact same disorganized, deep catalog retail philosophy. With a popular live music venue called Steele's Tavern sitting right between them, the block functioned as a massive cultural hub that easily pulled thousands of shoppers downtown every single weekend. It was a highly profitable, comfortable duopoly that lasted right up until 1991, when a massive British multinational retail giant decided it wanted the territory. When HMV Canada dropped its flagship superstore onto 333 Yonge Street, it brought a level of weaponized corporate efficiency. The new building was meticulously organized across multiple levels connected by escalators, and it featured specialty sections occupying entire floors and areas where artists could perform. As part of its push to capture market share, HMV deployed a highly aggressive loss leader pricing that completely disrupted the local economy. While a standard new release compact disc at Sam the Record Man typically hovered around $17.99, HMV began selling major hit albums for just $14.99. They paired this brutal price cutting with generous loyalty cards for high-ticket items, easily siphoning away thousands of price-conscious Canadians away from the older stores. The British retailer also fundamentally changed the physical experience of buying music. They installed over 100 automated listening posts, allowing customers to simply pick up a pair of headphones and sample a track before making a purchase. They also embedded themselves into the 1990s youth culture by installing a storefront wall of 36 monitors broadcasting music videos and hosting massive rooftop concerts. They even dedicated their basement to underground electronic dance music, leveraging their massive international supply chains to import foreign compact discs much faster than the domestic competitors could ever manage. To cap it all off, they partnered with a national music television channel to install a webcam right inside the store, allowing teenagers to broadcast their thoughts directly to the nation. This was utterly devastating to the established duopoly. Completely unable to compete with HMV's ruthless pricing, modern aesthetic, and vast marketing budget, A&A Records was driven into bankruptcy and collapsed entirely by the end of 1991. Sam the Record Man managed to survive this initial onslaught primarily due to its immense brand loyalty, its massive entrenched franchise network, and a deep back catalogue that HMV initially lacked. However, the homegrown brand was now forced to fight a brutal, never-ending price war that permanently compressed their margins, starving the company of the essential cash flow it desperately needed to modernize its rapidly aging physical infrastructure. As the world entered a new millennium, the fundamental economics of the global music industry was fracturing, exposing massive structural vulnerabilities right at the heart of the empire. It was against this precarious backdrop in the year 2000 that an 80-year-old Sam Sniderman officially retired, dropping the entire operational burden squarely onto the shoulders of his sons, Jason and Robert. The popular narrative often unfairly blames the sons for crashing the business their father had driven so successfully for decades, but a closer look tells a completely different story. Jason and Robert inherited a sprawling, high-overhead physical network at the exact moment in history when massive real estate footprints became a catastrophic liability. Jason had been serving as the vice president of the Roblin Distributors arm, desperately trying to manage an analog supply chain that was already rotting from the inside out. The traditional franchise model was crumbling because record companies realized they could simply bypass the middleman. Labels began direct shipping their inventory straight to the independent franchise stores, instantly rendering Sam's massive central warehouse completely useless. That giant Church Street facility flipped from a highly profitable distribution hub into a massive financial drain overnight. The crisis didn't actually start when the sons took over. They'd merely inherited a long-running financial bleed. Since the late 1990s, the Sniderman family had been quietly underwriting the mounting corporate debt out of their own pockets, absorbing a staggering $15 million in personal losses just to keep the empire afloat and protect their father's legacy. By the fall of 2001, the math finally became impossible to ignore. Compounding the relentless pressure from big box retailers was the terrifying emergence of the internet as a viable distribution platform. On October 30th, the company officially filed for bankruptcy. Despite this catastrophic corporate failure, Jason and Robert refused to let the iconic Yonge Street location die without a fight. They managed to successfully restructure their debt, secure the towering neon signs, and miraculously reopen the flagship store in 2002 alongside a handful of surviving independent franchises. They aggressively tried to pivot the brand toward online sales to catch up with the changing times, hoping the famous name would carry weight on the internet. But an independent, debt-saddled retailer simply lacked the capital and logistical infrastructure to compete with what was coming next. That brief revival of the Yonge Street flagship was ultimately just a prolonged stay of execution. Profound shift in human behavior, driven entirely by broadband internet, fundamentally rewrote the rules of the global entertainment market. At the turn of the millennium, the physical music retail industry was a massive multi-$100 million machine, and that entire economic foundation evaporated in just a few short years. The sudden rise of MP3s and file-sharing networks like Napster completely stripped music of its physical scarcity, turning it into a weightless digital file that could be infinitely duplicated for free. When Apple commercialized this shift with the iTunes Store, buying a track became a frictionless one-click process. This instantly killed the experiential nature of shopping. The tactile, communal thrill of exiting the Dundas subway station to hunt through racks under massive neon lights was erased entirely, replaced almost overnight by now isolated Canadians staring at computer screens. By the spring of 2007, the financial bleeding was impossible to contain. Jason and Robert Sniderman decided to finally surrender the massive building, formally announcing on May 29th that 347 Yonge Street would permanently shut its doors at the end of June. Addressing the press, Robert Sniderman explicitly told CBC that culture and society are changing. Our decision is a reflection on the state of the industry. We can't compete with what's happening in technology. In an admission that signaled the definitive end of an era, Sniderman acknowledged that the family had long agonized over the choice, but that shifting customer habits, declining CD sales, and digital alternatives left them no choice. It was an inevitable decision, he stated flatly. The role of the record retailer is being phased out. The closure dealt a crushing psychological blow to Sam Sniderman himself. The aging founder struggled deeply to comprehend how an invisible digital code had completely annihilated the physical empire he spent 60 years building. He passed away in September 2012 at the age of 92. While Sam Sniderman's physical empire was gone, there's a brutal historical irony embedded in the aftermath of those Yonge Street retail wars. HMV Canada, the corporate behemoth that had seemingly conquered the landscape by destroying A&A Records and starving the Sniderman franchise, ultimately fell to the exact same digital sword. As early MP3 file sharing evolved into frictionless algorithmic streaming platforms, the necessity for a physical superstore vanished completely. Those once futuristic automated listening posts that gave HMV a massive advantage in the 90s became entirely obsolete the second Canadians could carry the entirety of recorded human music in their pockets. The massive 333 Yonge Street location quickly transformed into an out-of-time relic, suffering the exact same fate it had previously inflicted upon its rivals. By early 2017, the math had finally caught up with the British invader, and HMV Canada announced its bankruptcy and shuttered all 102 of its remaining stores, marking the end of the compact disc retail era. When those stores went dark, the vacant leases were scooped up by Doug Putman, owner of Sunrise Records. Decades earlier, Sunrise operated as a minor competitor on the Yonge Street Strip, surviving the digital shift simply because they never bloated their physical infrastructure. Putman capitalized on the niche resurgence of vinyl to rebuild physical retail on a highly curated scale. In a massive reversal of fortune, Sunrise expanded globally and actually acquired the bankrupt HMV brand in the United Kingdom in 2019. The high overhead empires collapsed under their own weight, allowing a smaller, agile competitor to quietly take over the remaining market. Even though the corporate empire was dismantled, Sam Sniderman ensured his preservation of Canadian music outlived his business. Before his death, he donated 175,000 sound recordings to the University of Toronto, establishing the largest academic music archive in the country and permanently protecting the domestic catalogue. The public fought just as hard to protect his physical legacy. When Ryerson University bought the Yonge Street property in 2008, a massive grassroots campaign forced a heritage mandate to save the iconic spinning neon records. Following years of logistical battles and an extensive restoration requiring 36,000 pounds of steel, the signs were permanently relit in 2017 atop a city-owned building at 277 Victoria Street. While the neon spun over downtown Toronto, the actual retail brand quietly survived for another 2 decades inside a single independently owned franchise in Belleville, Ontario. Operated by Spencer Destin since 1979, this final location weathered the digital apocalypse by catering strictly to a hyper-local vinyl market. His retirement sale in early 2024 finally severed the absolute last physical link to the 140-store empire. But what do you reckon? Do you still remember the thrill of flipping through physical records on a Saturday afternoon? Or are you perfectly happy letting a streaming algorithm choose your next favorite song? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Love reading them all, and thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. Make sure to ring that bell, like and subscribe, and as always, stay curious.